Welcome to Show Studio. It's our second live roundup panel of the day. So we're going to be talking about London Fashion Week and kind of weaving our way through all the different shows, talking about some of the highlights, but also unpicking sort of themes that came out, be it kind of aesthetic ones or also things that we were kind of considering a lot. I think it was an interesting season in some ways because there was a lot of kind of anniversaries. We talked about that a lot in New York because obviously you had the big 10 years of Alex Wang and Jason Wu, and then you had Givenchy, 10 years of Riccardo Tisci. But I think in London it also felt like you saw that as well. You saw it with Erdem and that whole set of designers who've kind of grown up, and then you have a new guard coming through. And I think there's lots to kind of think about in terms of what it means to be a successful fashion designer, what it means to be a kind of emerging talent or a growing brand. It's quite an interesting season for that. But before we kind of dive into all our discussions, I will let my fab set of panellists, my favourite panellist here, starting with you, Frances, just introduce themselves briefly.
Thanks, Lou. Frances Corner, and I'm head of the London College of Fashion.
I'm Sasha Wilkins. I was a fashion editor for many years, most recently as executive fashion editor at the Wall Street Journal in New York, but I'm probably better known now as the editor of LibertyLondonGirl.com.
I'm Tom Rasmussen. I am a writer, mainly for Wonderland magazine, and I am a drag queen and performance artist too, just to get that in there.
And I'm Gianluca Longo, contributing European editor for W magazine and a fashion observer, and that's it.
And that's it. You make me laugh. I don't really know how to start this one, which is quite an interesting one, and maybe that speaks to London's strength, because all the other cities it's really easy to kind of pinpoint a designer to kick it off with. In New York we obviously talked about Givenchy because it was such a kind of big display and so discussed and kind of reported. In Milan you always talk about Prada, and now you always talk about Gucci. And Paris there's always the highlights as well, but London it's really hard to pick a standout show. I think if you were thinking business or technology, you talk about Burberry, but if you were thinking emerging talent, you could talk about a Claire Barrow or Marcus Almeida. If you're talking about kind of establishment, but still kind of really creative, you could talk about Christopher Kane. So I'm intrigued to hear who you guys think was a highlight, if there was anyone that really stood out that you think we should begin our discussions with.
I thought it was interesting to see what Jonathan Saunders did. Now he's got a backer and all that money. That extraordinary venue he had at King's Cross, which was a transparent marquee, like being in a very elegant version of Kew Gardens on a hot day. And he was clearly making quite a big statement of intent, I thought, showing that.
That's interesting. I'm glad you brought up kind of someone at that point in their career, because obviously Jonathan's been around for a while now, and I think in a sense you don't see him as a new designer. But then we were talking on our New York panel this morning, we were talking about Alex Wang, who has only been around for 10 years. And his turnover is now 100 million, and it's so strange to compare that to what we deem successful in London. I'm not saying by any means that New York designers are more successful, but it did make me think how much who we see as the kind of new establishment, how much they are still operating on a really small scale, and how hard it is as well.
Alex has got an awful lot of family money behind him, so I think we should never forget where people are actually getting their funding from. And of course his price points are so much lower.
That's interesting.
Roxander, I think it was interesting, her and Erdem and Mary Petranzu, that sort of that group of designers who I think for me the aesthetic was so strong. I think and that's what I quite like about London as well, where it really sort of nails it. You feel that's where it really can influence a lot of other collections and also epitomise what London is like, because there's good print, there's good shape, there's again quite a lot of, I thought for me, across the board, some amazing sort of fabrics and use of colour, so it wasn't necessarily one, it was more a feel.
I think we're definitely the best colourists. I think we kind of really
I think it was a very vibrant season for London. I mean, talking about the what we used to call the young designers are now completely established. From Erdem and Mary Petranzu show, there was such a fantastic show, I must say. But also, I thought there was also a new wave of this, as I call it, the fanciful designers, who like Molly Goddard or Faustine, I never know how to pronounce it, Steinman, Sadie Williams, they do all these kind of fluffy, fancy clothes, a la Madame Kirchhoff, that actually we were missing and we missed for some seasons, and I think now they're all coming back. So I think London again is having, had a very good season of having, the established going for their own way, everyone with their own identity, not following any trends. And now this young pool of the pool of young designers that are actually in a way very similar among each other, but again had a bit of more space. And I suppose also the new location of the shows, and having also the ICA location for the presentation of the new gents and then the new designers, I think helped a lot in raising much more attention.
You saw much more public interaction. I think, when it was at Somerset House, because you kind of had to enter Somerset House, there was that sense of you were in fashion and then you left and you were out of fashion. But I think because it was in Soho, you saw so many more people kind of just like gawping, which I quite liked, because it kind of, the city was very much aware and live. In terms of Fashion Week.
And also they had, the live shows with a big screen on Golden Square with the deck chairs and, the little cafe. I think very much was London was back to its roots, and literally anything can go, everything will be fun. Let's be fanciful, as I said, with the young designers, and let's see also the established what they did. So I was very, very happy with all the results of this season.
It almost feels that London over the last 10 years has become so strong that we can go back to showing somewhere like Brewer Street, but you don't need to be at Somerset House with that huge message it's sending out about Fashion Week being a growing business. It's saying we've got the confidence that we can show in a brutalist car park because what we do is so good that it doesn't actually matter where we show.
I'm sorry, go on, you carry.
Thank you. I felt like there was, between sort of the more established designers, even like Erdem after 10 years this year, and the younger designers, I thought there was I felt a real big dichotomy between the two in terms of what they're representing. With the younger designers, I felt like there was a lot of fear, interestingly. And I also felt the space at Brewer Street also, I don't know, people were quite it was interesting to see, I guess, fashion people put in a situation they didn't really know what was going on, because you can just walk into Somerset House, where the shows are, but there was, I felt slight more apprehension, and I felt like that it's sort of, with the Molly Goddards and with Claire Barrows, there was this kind of dystopian, and I think, that was, I don't know if that's a...
No, I really agree with you. I think it's a really smart point to make, and I feel like there's a big divide aesthetically, but I think also in terms of, feel and ethos. I think
politic as well.
Completely, when you look at Christopher Kane, Roxanda, Mary, that kind of set that you mentioned, there's a lot of optimism within their designs. They're quite grown up. They're very luxurious in a kind of traditional sense, and very beautiful. And there's quite a lot of positivity. But then you look at the younger designers, and I think there's definitely this sense that it is very political. Like someone like Claire Barry's work and Molly Goddard's work. Molly Goddard's show was kind of about the notion of being in a factory. This was about kind of broken, the Claire Barry presentation we just saw was about broken machinery, and it's very political, but it's quite, as you say, it's quite conscious of the times and the lack of opportunities for young people.
That's what I was going to say. I think that's what it's mirroring, and I think that's what's interesting if you also consider all of the fashion weeks, as you were in the introduction. You're getting this either, if you are the Burberrys or the, I don't know, Marc Jacobs or Chanel or whatever it is, you have this huge backing, you're established. If you are an emerging young designer, how you're going to, what place are you going to have within the fashion industry? Where are you going to sell? How much should you sell for? How are you going to resource it? You're mentioning obviously Alexander Wang having sort of financial backing. If you haven't got it, do you show? How do you show? And the cost of it, particularly as if you've graduated with student loans and actual collections are so expensive. I think this does give it an edge, and the sort of dystopian anxiety does come, which again is great, because that gives it another sort of reality to the world that we're living in.
That's how it should be. In a way. If we talk about Erdem and Mary and Christopher Kane 10 years ago, was exactly the same. Shows organized at the last minute, sewn things under the table, and friends and family and neighbors. So I don't
think there was the same. I don't know, it's hard because
but look at the late 90s when Andrew Grove is showing, for example, and subterranean vaults in Camden with flies, and I think we'd lost that edge in
razor blade
because everyone tried to be really safe. But I don't know if you agree with this theory, but I was thinking about the rise of Instagram and the wanting the visual. And the young designers like Claire and Molly are creating these amazing statement pieces, which I think people really want to buy into, because people are much happier now to make a visual statement with their clothing, which I don't think we've seen for the last 5 or 6 years.
No, I don't
think even longer than, on one level, you could say, you go 90s, but you could actually go to the 80s and think, well, actually, that's where you had so much more statement in terms of whether you were punk or what, whatever it was that you were wanting. It was much more aggressive, and I think that that's what's beginning to come out, and I think that's to be applauded.
Very much.
And I think again, it's the other side of it is that when there is so much fashion and stuff around, you can. Then you want to have a statement piece, or you want things that are really well made, or you want things that are really quite angry because you're wanting to find another way of expressing yourself.
I think it's about that connection to your clothing, which is something, there's a certain kind of, when you see the more established designers, there's not that sense of emotion within their clothing, and I think that's become something that people actually really want. I was really thinking a lot about the success of Vêtements in Paris, but also obviously now you've got the Balenciaga appointment, which I think would have been really unfathomable about sort of, even like 2 or 3 years ago. And I was thinking part of what makes them seem so interesting is this idea of a piece being really, it could be, just like the perfect piece, like the perfect pair of kind of, vintage jeans that you find and you can never get again. And that kind of sense of a connection to your clothing that is about more than it being expensive. And I think that's what's interesting with what Claire and Molly do. There's a big focus on this idea of kind of, something being touched by hand, or something being DIY, or something almost sometimes being borrowed or taken from somewhere else.
Very much creating a world.
It's a bit like what Phoebe English as well. You put her within that category. I think also the other thing, I was sort of going through some of the collections, sort of getting ready to come, and the thing that I found really interesting was where you did just have say 30 pieces or whatever. Somehow it distilled and got to the essence and was braver. Yeah. You have a sense, actually, if I'm going to have to look at 50 looks, it's just like something for everybody. You don't really care. It's just about stuff. And I think that's what I think is interesting.
So more creativity on a budget, maybe.
Absolutely.
What less to do.
Definitely.
But looking at the Molly Goddard show, I love the pieces that she creates, and they're amazing. But I did, just to go back to the show, the difference between her and Claire, because I was looking out for those two this season, I was really excited to see what they were doing. But I just had a slight problem with the setup, the sandwich factory. I thought it felt really, it wasn't like a clever commentary on minimum wage jobs. That's the thing, and I don't know. And maybe what she's doing, I think, is, sorry, this I guess quite rude, but what she's doing, I guess, is appealing to her Instagram followers who are going to save up their $6.50 an hour to buy one of these dresses, which I would do.
I didn't interpret it as that. I thought it was about conveyor belt fashion, this idea of things just being churned out. I know it's really hard, I think, with
that kind of...
I also think, I didn't know how... I think it's clever to do a set, I think, when you're a young designer, and I think it's hard when you do something that is in any way political, because people can read it really, really differently. I did think there was something quite... I think it was quite flippantly done. Yeah, well, I think that's because it's a delicate line, whereas Claire Barrow, I think, captured this. I really felt it anyway. It captured this kind of, I don't know, youthful fear. And I know I was reading in the press release that it was this post-tech anxiety, and I think again, tech is so interesting. What the young designers are doing with tech, which is like looking at what happens if it ends, or like mirroring what their Instagram followers love, and kind of that communication. But these big budget brands like Burberry, they're, I don't know, it's just, there's a slight fear on the lower, younger end. And then with the Burberrys, you have this huge tech employment, this embrace. But then I found Claire's show really funny to see it in the context of Burberry, because it was all about broken machines and technology not working, and it made me think, what would happen to the Burberry show if none of that worked? If the stream didn't work, if the click to buy weird thing didn't work, if their email telling you to be on time didn't work.
The personal message from Chris Bailey.
But this is our daily life. I mean, we rely on machines, we rely on emails, we rely on Wi-Fi, we rely on everything. I mean,
but
if
certain
something
shows
goes wrong,
rely on them more than other shows, and I think that's what's interesting, because it made me think of the shows that would stand up if all the technical stuff went wrong, and shows that wouldn't. Do you remember that Marnie show? It was about 3 seasons ago. The music didn't work.
Yeah, so it was amazing.
But it was amazing. Yeah. But then I thought, imagine a Burberry show if the music didn't work. You'd just be like, oh my god, this is so awful. It was interesting to think about that, and how there's Instagram moments that certain brands rely on, and it just got me thinking a lot about user experience at Fashion Week.
But also Burberry have to do the gimmicks anyway, don't they? Because essentially they're selling a trench coat. Bottom line.
I found this show quite a strange one though, because I felt like it was trying to be more.
I think it was a bit of a change of direction from Christopher that I suppose needed.
Did you like it?
I really liked it because it was a bit edgier, a bit sexier, much leaner as well. Because the last 2-3 seasons was very focused on the trench coat. You know, we've seen it in python, we've seen it in lace, we've seen it in vinyl, we've seen it in leopard print, any sort of things. And I suppose at a certain point we needed to have a change, and with this show it really managed to do it in a way. I mean, one of my favorite looks that I think I posted on Instagram, as you do, it was that blazer with the gold piping, and I can tell you it had the most likes on my pages because it was something completely new for Instagram. And then of course the blazer has become a big trend, you know, seen in Milan and Paris after. But I really enjoyed it. And you know, if it's a concert, if it's Alison Moyet, if it's a live streamed or whatever, fine. If it's not, it's fine too. I mean, I don't sometimes look at all the surroundings too much because I'm always so interested in the clothes. Okay, they want to go with production from the moon, fine, I'm very happy to see a production from the moon, but if they don't show nice clothes, I'm not happy. So at the end of the day, what counts?
It's interesting how dialed down this was when you think about their big Bloomsbury collections and splashiness. And when you've got all the young designers who are creating these big, bright, vibrant, splashy things like Molly again. And then you go to this, you know, such an established brand, and they've decided to dial all of that back.
But that's how you keep alive a brand, I suppose. You know, you cannot propose always the same tones every season. I mean, we've seen changes everywhere. You know, even Mary, the success of America Trans is also the ability of every season changing from the prints to the 3D prints, and then to the applique and whatever. And now this show instead was completely different, for example.
But I wonder, I mean, for me, the Burberry, where it's always placed on its Englishness, it felt less like that. I was just wondering, is he, and what sort of market when you look at that?
Well, he's done that before. I don't know if you remember, there was some collection with literally leather shot style jacket with studs and very skinny trousers, very high heels and platforms. So from time to time, it just changes direction, and it shows this sexy side that is maybe inside him, and we don't know. But I didn't mind at all. Actually, I really liked it.
No, I like it. I was just interested. I just wondered whether this was, again, because obviously Burberry is so much about. It's got such it's a global. It really is a global. Whereas, and so, is there another market, or is there slight repositioning going on? I
agree. I felt a sort of a. It didn't seem like definedly British. No, but I liked that, I think, because what is definedly British? I guess that I guess.
Yeah. It's so bankable. So
we're at the horrible word, wearable.
I'm just going to say.
It's not horrible.
No, wearable.
Wearable. It's not horrible.
It's a horrible word.
It is a horrible
in terms of show reviews.
Show reviews,
it says nothing.
But I always say relevant.
But on a daily life, it's the best word ever, no?
Yeah, of course. But it's a lazy show review term.
Yeah, I agree with you there. But I think one thing that was interesting this season is that sense of what wearable means and how wide that was, because I looked at something like Claire. It goes exactly back to what you were saying, Frances. I looked at her show and it doesn't look mad. It's, often like that's the problem with young designers is you're like, what is the relevance of this? But Claire's stuff is so, like, it looks great. And I think that's why actually it's so brilliant that she shows it on like her mates and they street cast so effectively, because like actually whack a lot of that Burberry collection on a normal woman, I hate that expression, but like a woman who's not like 15 and really skinny, and it just wouldn't look great. Whereas this is I mean, none of them are exactly kind of, ginormous, but they're, they've got bodies and they've got different body shapes, and that collection still looks really beautiful and really brilliant. And I think that's what's really great about how young designers are proving the relevance of their clothing.
I think it's quite a sort of, in a way, quite a sort of sexy collection.
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas Burberry is it looks very neutral in comparison, even though it's very body conscious.
Well, it looks very fragile, I think, because the models have such a lack of personality.
They look so powerful. And the clothes are, and you would see them stomping down the road and, be totally in awe.
Yeah, you'd be engaged.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's also such a buzzword at the moment, I know, but it's really actually nice to see it, just looking at Claire, it's like nice to see it continue. Like the younger designers, so Fashion East, like Caitlin Price, Richard Malone as well, they seem to have this like impatience with gender, which is really nice. I think that's whereas like Burberry just upholds, and Burberry's there and it does some great stuff, but it just upholds feminine and masculine, which aren't really things. And I think it's amazing. It really is amazing to see this set of designers being really impatient with what gender means.
We were talking about this on the New York panel, that it's really hard, isn't it? Because I really agree with you, and I thought Fashionista was really beautiful and really exciting. But the difficulty with that is it works so beautifully at a presentation and in that context, but fashion is so gendered. You know, we were talking about it like the magazines, it tends to be men's magazines, women's magazines, there's 2 separate fashion weeks.
The fashion markets. Really.
Yeah, it's so split, and it makes me wonder how those designers will find a kind of a place, and if it will affect the way they're bought, and in a way end up with their message getting even more lost. Because the reason we were talking about it on New York is actually relates to London. We were talking about Grace Wells Bonner and how she's found herself in a position where she does menswear, but a lot of the big stores who are picking her up are buying it for women, so their women's wear buyers are going in and buying. And it made me think, maybe she doesn't care about that, maybe that's fine. But I thought it is really difficult if that, I really like that phrase that using patience with gender is what you're really about, but then you have to fit into this very, very rigidly gendered fashion. Because I wonder, at the college, are there any courses where you can study design where you're not split on a menswear, women's wear pathway?
Yes, I mean, we have things like bespoke tailoring, for example, which you have men's and women's tailoring, sort of, and then we also have another course which is all about sort of fashion design development, where again it can be a mixture. But we also have, shown and mixed it up.
Yeah, mixed it up.
And we do have the sort of we encourage, particularly undergraduate level, a lot of collaboration. So a lot of textile students will collaborate with different and create a whole look. And we might have contour, might have some menswear, and they'll all create the look.
Yeah, that's
rather than it being a single designer, which I think is because obviously, the industry is so much about collaboration and teamwork, and that's what we can do. So, and I think that's a really good lesson, whereas you get to postgraduate level, and then it's much more, I'm a menswear, because you're really trying to sort of nail what it is that you think about.
So get into an industry by kind of box, which is, of course, that's how it is.
It is.
But it's just so interesting to see, I think it's just really, really wonderful to see across the board. This much questioning, even in Women's Week or in Men's Week, you still see.
Do you think sort of? I mean, I think it's a really interesting debate because there is so much, isn't there, about the sort of notions of sexuality as being very fluid. There isn't, it's not something that our students are engaged with very much, but it hasn't. It's still, fashion is very, despite it all, is very conventional. Now, whether it's because it's sort of set up, as you say, for all of these collections at all of this time, broken up in these ways, and I think although some designers do experiment, actually to really break it is quite hard.
I think a very good example of all this is Alessandro Michele collection for Gucci that is literally broken the rule on the catwalk since it first started. So that I suppose we saw before with Jonathan Anderson, with J.W. Anderson, who was in menswear collection showing women's and all very confusing. But with such a big house like Gucci in Milan, to show such an ambiguous or androgynous look of men and women, that will actually give us an answer very soon in the next seasons when who's going to buy these clothes, who are you addressing to, and what is going to be.
I didn't think it was that. Sorry, I didn't think it was that androgynous though. I think his boys look relatively effeminate because they're very skinny, but I think the women look very much like women. In this season, I think earlier,
the last season it was the very first season when he broke the ice of the new Gucci. Hello, I'm here to open.
And he had a lot of guys on the runway.
A lot of guys dressed like girls. I mean, not dressed like girls, but
it was quite genderless.
Exactly, pussy-balls.
It's like John Galliano with Margiela, wasn't it?
Exactly. So we will see that, but it's very much of a new. Maybe that is a new way.
I look at Jonathan Anderson's shows, and I sometimes think he just doesn't like women very much. Because of the way he constricts and binds the body. And
it's really interesting that you say that, because he made this comment quite recently where he said that, do you remember when he did like the menswear ruffles, which was actually ages ago, and it was, everyone was kind of like, oh, he's just doing this for attention, blah, blah, blah. And he kind of gave this interview quite recently, I can't remember what it was in, but he said that maybe he was too ahead of the times with that. And I kind of agree with him though. I think when he was doing kind of, hyper feminine menswear.
Well, I think he kicked off this genderless thing.
Oh my God, he completely did. He's being referenced so much like those. The first Gucci collection, a lot of people did say, that there was a real kind of whiff of J.W. Anderson. But I feel like it's funny that now everyone's doing androgyny or genderless fashion. his collections seem quite hyper feminine in a kind of really cliched way. Like last season was all about kind of, getting dressed for a party. So it was quite like, like really bad retro, like those knee-high boots, massive earrings. And this was quite like, really like leg and button sleeves, like sort of super roughly, like very kind of, the lingerie detail. It's much more kind of like saccharine than he's usually done. And I thought that was quite interesting that he's kind of moving on while everyone else is. But
the difference, I think, which is the thing that I noted between, again, the younger designers and J.W. Anderson, who's, now huge, but he just has this ability to like make me want to wear everything he designs. I don't know why, maybe it's because I just am biased and really think he's great, but even the puff sleeve jacket, I was like, oh, that's awful, and then I was like, wait a minute, I want it. And
I don't feel like that about his stuff at all.
I'm not a fan.
No. I really like him as a designer. I find him intriguing. I love interviewing him. He's one of those people that has loads to say. He's great, but I never look at his clothes and want to wear them.
That's so interesting.
Never.
I wonder who buys them.
Sorry?
I wonder who buys them.
Yeah.
I think his own label is still relatively niche in the sense that it got way more stockists after the Loewe signing did really well.
It's beautiful.
And I think he's been really smart recently with some really beautiful commercial pieces. Like he did that bag that everyone had at Fashion Week with the JW anchor logo. And some, like, I tell you, some of his pieces are really beautiful. He's done some really great knit pieces which are really, really lovely. And I love, the Sailor collection that he did. I think was really, really great. But I think he likes to kind of jar the eye.
Very much.
But what's interesting is, I think John Henderson at the beginning was, I would say, use the word political in terms of gender. And I think now, the more he progresses, like you say, it becomes more constrictive, it becomes more typically feminine, but then you have this new set of designers coming up, questioning gender again, questioning a lot of like systems. And I wonder if the more backing you get, the bigger your brand gets, the more followers you get, you kind of have to become less political.
I don't think he's ever been that political. I don't think he's ever been about challenging systems. It's challenging aesthetics.
He's challenging aesthetics.
But that is challenging. You can see the gender is such an entrenched system. I think I disagree slightly.
I also question how original he is as well.
Well, he's like a Phoebe Philo. He's good at pulling references. That's his kind of
But I think in a way, for me, in many respects, he sort of epitomises what it is to be. I mean, I don't know whether you call them fashion designers anymore. That's why it's quite interesting to talk about the younger generation, where you've got quite a focused collection with a really strong aesthetic. Because if you are designing as he is, men's and women's under his own label, and Loewe as well, with all of their, actually that's, the pressure. The machine that is required.
Well, he calls himself a creative director, not a designer.
Absolutely, and I feel Christopher
he's a proper creative director rather
is.
than a designer. And you can see, from the, as we said, from the references, the collections, every season. I actually enjoyed it. I loved it. Again, looking at the clothes and the idea behind. Who's gonna wear it? I don't know.
I just thought some of the girls were too thin. The opening looks with the bra very tops, like it was actually quite uncomfortable to watch just because they were so thin and they looked so fragile.
And the thing where I always say that his view of women, I think it's
when
why,
he's such a strong character.
It's why I don't want to wear his clothes because they don't speak to any vision of,
well, you can wear
women that I think of.
You can, as I say, it's wearable. That pink number, no, the ruffled. The one on Binks.
The one on Binks, yeah.
I agree with that though, but it felt. I didn't think about that, but it didn't feel like there was a sort of a scary across the board this time at London and at the other shows as well, the other cities. I wasn't as concerned about model size and weight as I have been in the past.
Oh, I was. I just think it gets so bad.
Also, Gareth Pugh's models, I think, when I was looking through that, they again reminded me were very, very thin.
Really?
I thought that sort of when you
I
look
actually
here.
really like Gareth Pugh this season.
Oh my god, I thought Gareth Pugh was the best.
No,
it was the best. Talking about, completely forgot about him. I mean, we always talk about the same name as Pugh Gareth.
I thought it was fantastic.
Actually, it was a fantastic show.
But
Lots of
and
energy.
epitomised Soho and the new location of London and made so many.
I love the
and very often people forget about him. Maybe because of the thing that he went to Paris, so he had a time off.
He's got
London
such
Fashion
huge
Week.
sales in Asia, though, doesn't he?
But I also think the thing with
China
Gareth is he doesn't want what everyone else wants. Like I interviewed him recently. It came out in another, I think it was like 2 issues ago, maybe the last issue, and he was like, I don't want to be selling X, Y, like this amount on this online retail. I don't want massive store. I don't want like Mount Street shop opening. He was like, I just want to do what I do and do it really well.
Except he is sold in quite a lot of boutiques in China.
He is, but I don't think he has anywhere near the same level
the same volume
of
kind of interest. I mean, for me, he is a designer. And you can see this split beginning to happen between those who are creative directors and are sort of feeding the need for a much greater range of products and. Whereas he epitomises London.
Well, I think he's driven by creativity.
He epitomises London. That's so true. Absolutely.
I love.
Sorry, go on. No, just stop.
I love this show.
I love the referencing of like kind of divinely Bowery. But I think it was poignant now because the gentrification of Soho is so on our doorstep. Berwick Street has just been sold and it's going to be a travel lodge. But I don't know. I just found watching it when I was there just slightly. I was like, it feels so far from what's outside. I loved the celebration of this kind of like disco. That was something that happened a lot, and I loved the references to Lee Bowery and the reference, all the different, divine references and things. But I felt like he was, because he's, in London, I felt like he was commenting on the gentrification and the loss of Soho and celebrating figures from its past and figures from its now and that colour. But I just felt a little like, that's all well and good, but it's very far. It's kind of fetishizing this,
I
this
think
past.
with Gareth, it's always about
I think it's a reminder. I think it's quite important because I think at the moment, the thing that could kill London is the fact. There was a report out yesterday. 3,500 artists are leaving London because they can't afford. And so in a way, and you say gentrification of Soho, but it's the gentrification of everywhere. And in a way, he's like a reminder of what has been the creative driver that makes London very unique in a way, and it feeds the creativity.
Yeah, and I think it's I think it's completely right. I think it's a reminder of the possibilities. Gareth's always been interested in transformation and opportunity, and I think what this was saying, as much as I agree with you, there was the kind of very present nostalgia. I think it's about this notion that you can create these characters, or you can create these. You could be this person, or you could do this. If you think of how Gareth set up, like when they did the Peckham Squat, Wow, where they all lived in the Peckham Co-op, like that was amazing, and that seems really far away. And to talk about that, that whole gang, Matthew Stone and what have you, it seems really nostalgic. But actually, kind of that creation of opportunities and making communities against what is possible for you, I think is really interesting. And I think maybe that's what this was about in a way, is that the way these characters will continue to pop up, because the fact that Gareth is still here and still showing kind of speaks about but I agree, I think this was a political collection in that sense, very much about Soho, but then I think maybe it's a kind of suggestion of what could be the next Soho, who could be the next Lee Bowery.
Well, here's hoping.
I'm just trying to be really positive. It is really scary.
I just like the rigour of this. It's just so beautifully thought through. The clothes will translate. I just think it's fantastic.
But also, coming back to the point you were making earlier about, I think despite the sort of all the references, actually a lot of women would really love to wear this because they are fantastic silhouette. They're the colour is wonderful.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
In a way, it would accommodate lots of different sorts of shapes and sizes, despite the fact that a lot of the models are quite thin.
Yeah.
And I think you just feel really amazing. And that's what you want, to feel sometimes, isn't it? Clothes.
It's looking back. The red trouser suit, the one on the top,
above that.
That is
beautiful,
fabulous, and it cuts very well.
It really does. But when you think about that first show at the Royal Academy, the black PVC one, the one that everyone was desperate to get into, and then you look from that to this.
I think he's amazing. He's so brilliant, and I think we were talking on the panel this morning about what it means to be a successful designer, and I think he's amazing both kind of aesthetically and for his vision, but also just as an example to designers of being able to do what you want to do. And I think he's always pursued these different projects that he's really engaged by, be it fashion film or collaborating, a lot of the work he's done in costume. And I think that's really interesting, and in that it sends this message: you don't have to be bought by a massive group, you don't have to have a Mount Street store. You can, and you look at a Phoebe English or a Claire Barry, and you hope that they kind of see that this trajectory might be slightly harder, but is viable.
But it does also bring up the thing of, do you need to leave London in order to be successful in what you're doing? And I'm not saying successful money, I'm saying successful creative, because of course he left London very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking. But then, in a way, he didn't leave London.
Now.
He never, like, he showed in Paris, but his studio was in London. So it's that kind of...
Actually, I never knew why he moved to Paris, to show in Paris. It was,
I think
it was very...
It was, I think I don't want to speak out of time, I think it was, he's always had a studio in London, he's always lived in London. But I think because obviously he had a kind of relationship with Rick Owens and Michelle Lamy, and I think it made a lot more sense for his show to be out there, and then for him to be based out of London. Yeah. But I think there's an element to that where I think we're going to see more people showing in different cities and moving around. Like, it's interesting that we talked about Givenchy moving to New York, but I think, you imagine a lot of our designers showing in different places, and you think how much they would make sense. Like, I always think, someone like a Jonathan Saunders doing more in New York, I know there's been kind of moments of that, would be really interesting, and I think that's important to kind of get them out and stop them just being...
I think also, I think that's a really interesting point, because one of the things we sort of think about and debate, obviously we have quite a lot of international students in the college, which is really important, because obviously it's such a global business, and it's a way that they create these amazing sort of networks. But you think, we have a major relationship in Shanghai, we do a lot of work in Tokyo. Actually, the idea that it isn't just the usual form, it would be, saying, like, obviously Gareth sells a lot of work in Asia. I mean, the idea that you would take your show and say, actually, I'm going to show in Shanghai, or I'm going to go and do it in Tokyo or whatever.
But that's why he's been really so clever with film, because he's made his work really global just through using the internet. And I do think it's interesting to compare him to someone like Christopher Kane, who's really is new establishment and kind of incredibly successful in terms of big Mount Street store, but such a kind of limited online presence. And I wonder if that's held him back in some ways, because it doesn't feel like his work has become... It's not very shared in that sense.
It's very interesting going to something like Singapore Fashion Week, which I've done I think 3 or 4 times, because Colin McDowell is the fashion director there, and he brings in designers. So I've seen Roland show there, I've seen Mary show there, and the hunger is extraordinary. And they do... Ardem's been too. Nicola was there, Niva, and I sit in the front row, and every night the women in the front row, the very rich women from all over Asia who fly in for the shows, they wear full runway looks, which they own, and they change. So I wasn't recognising people at the designer dinners each night, because on one night there'll be the Roland Mouret woman, very chic in a little sexy dress, and the next night they'll be in a full Mary Kay 10,000 quid look, head to toe, and they're buying them to such huge volumes, especially Mary Kay. And I've never seen anyone wear a full Mary Kay show look before. Now I know where they are.
I think if you're wearing Mary Kay, you're kind of wearing full look, because it's not like you just like team it with some jeans and like a sweater.
She does do the t-shirts, and she does do the print dresses for her fusion, but these are the full-on
full-on pieces,
the embellished pieces. Mary's an interesting one to talk about, actually, because it's interesting when we were talking about the importance of moving on, and I think Mary, I think she did have a difficult few seasons where she tried to let print go a little bit and move more into the the surface embellishment and the silhouette.
When she worked Lesage.
Yeah, and she's done amazing work now, but I think when she kind of tried to transition, people were a bit like, whoa, what is happening? And I think it's really important that she did, because I think people are so apathetic and exhausted by print now. She would have almost...
But she wouldn't be doing what she's doing. I mean, again, this is one of the problems, isn't it, with the creative process. You have to be able to experiment and do something else, and for people to allow that. I mean, the idea that you're, the idea of an emerging designer, how long are you emerging? I mean, you could argue you're emerging all of your life if you're really good and you're really feeling that creative process. And I think that's why you feel she is going to be sustainable in a serious, creative way, because she's prepared to take those sorts of chances. And that's
it's a
so
risk.
important.
It's a risk that you have to take, but also to always create some buzz and some excitement for us and for the buyers. I mean, it was something that happened. It was in Paris, and I went to see a collection in a showroom, and then while I was going down, I met a buyer that I know very well, and she said, "Oh, you just been there?" I said, "Yes." I said, "So how is it?" And I said, "Oh, really nice." He said, "Has she moved on?" That question really made me click, because I said, "My God, a buyer is asking me if she's moved on to do something else." Because although we love that the certain designer be recognized for what they do well and whatever, at the end of the day, even the buyers, they want something new always to
also don't forget that the client, especially in America, they want dresses, and they want a lot of dresses. If you're a woman, if you're buying from Ikram in Chicago, you're buying from Neiman in Dallas, You want dresses and you want statement
but
dresses.
It was not talking about Mary. It was a general designer.
But
that,
just generally,
yeah.
And because in that I think about Rox and I think about Mary, and they're always going to want those clothes because those are the kind of women who go to so many events and they're always going to want amazing dresses.
So I suppose you want the novelty. You want something new all the time. I mean, maybe you want to stick to the designer because it fits you well, and you rely on it. As we say, it's a wearable designer, but then you want to have something new every season because
And Mary's a really seasonal designer in that sense of, I think she sticks to what she does really well, but her dresses, they have such visual impact.
Yeah.
She's very clever in a way because you almost can't wear them more than once or twice. Because everyone remembers them, which is really clever because it means and a lot of that kind of crowd are the same. Chris Kane is so seasonal. I think he's amazing, and I think his designs obviously stand the test of time, and outside of the fashion pack, of course, if you buy something you can wear it for a really long time, but I think those pieces, you look at it and you can name the collection, whereas I think a lot of the younger designers who are coming up, maybe because of going back to this notion of being more political and thinking about things like sustainability, doing something that's kind of throwaway each season seems quite abhorrent to them, so they work in a very seasonless way. Claire, like, you can't, you could wear it if you know her work very, very well, you'd recognise the motifs, but it's not the case that, you're like, oh, why are you wearing last season?
But it's quite hard, isn't it, for her, because it's quite hard for like Mary, for a designer who really came out and had a thing, like that amazing, the prints and everything, to change direction, for a customer base. So it's a bit like, Jacques Mus was really, really criticised, I think, this season. I love the show, but was really criticised for doing the same thing. But it's hard to get that balance, I'm sure, for a designer, which is how much do you change?
Where do you draw the line between handwriting and then being a cliche of yourself?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's really hard also. I always talk to designers about this, and I've had the exact same conversation with, people like everyone from public school who are kind of New York shining lights through to Thomas Tate, where they talk about the disparity between press hype and sales, and they talk about how press is like make you seem like you're so established, he's doing this is what he's known for, whereas actually your buy is tiny, but you're kind of being forced to move on from what could feasibly be sold before it's even being bought by buyers, because press wants something new. And I think that's really hard, is that actually a lot of designers aren't even given time to establish their handwriting, because a lot of stuff that they do at the beginning that could have sold really well but buyers didn't pick up on because they may be like, oh, we'll see what they do next season. You have to kind of let go of to keep press interested. So by the time you're getting bought, your identity is really confused, and I think that's really, really, really tricky.
One of the things I thought was interesting overall about London this season was how many personal shoppers and stylists are coming to London from the US and from Asia to look for clothes for their personal clients, which I had when I was at the Wall Street Journal. I was in New York. I was quite intrigued by who was actually going to London, and that was back in 2008, 2009, and they weren't coming to London full stop. And, I was talking to Erica Hayes, who's a stylist out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and she comes to London now to look for clothes for her clients, who are mainly men and women, male and female sports stars, and she's coming all this way to buy clothes for them.
If you look at Drake wearing like Craig Green, it's amazing. Like, I think it's really
her
great.
Clients
it's
wear
really cool.
preen. I mean, you would not expect people, frankly, in Charlotte to be wearing a lot of preen. I mean, I love this, and it seems that London has become a place where people really are looking for beautiful clothes that people can wear now.
And for individuality and creativity and things that are well made. And coming back to that point about colour, I do think that there's some great colour that comes out of London, and for the sorts of clients that you can imagine that she's working with, that would be very important.
Yeah, very much, because people will still want to make a statement.
And London still has that, really. I mean, it's so obvious to say, but London still has, there's so much scope to talk about London and think about, because there's so many different ideas and different things. Whereas with sort of Paris and Milan, it felt quite like there was almost two options. It was either kind of amazing spectacly or like super femme, which I'm not, I don't really, as in, but there was quite linear representations of how women should dress. That's why Prada and Miu Miu, I think, stand out, and Gucci now, because this is offering more options, but I think London gives so many options for how women can dress, and that's really why
that's why it's unique. The fact that everyone can still try and being individual.
And intelligent clothes for intelligent women.
Well, it's about patronage, and I think that's quite fashionable in fashion. Obviously, it always has been, but I think even more so now, like particularly celebrities who are kind of taken very seriously for their craft, be it acting or singing or what have you. They don't want that sense of being tied to a brand. They want that sense of them supporting a brand. And I think that's helped a lot of people like your Christopher Kanes or your Marys, is that people like the idea of being associated with it because they're kind of in some way in an intellectual world with that designer and they're supporting it. It's not like they're just being paid to wear a frock. And you even see that with that, like the whole Balmain army thing. It is very much this idea that you're wearing it because of loyalty and a set of shared ideals. And I think that's really helping the London designers out, because it's making people want to kind of engage with that world and kind of, you know, wear a designer because you understand the ethos. It's much more than just the clothing.
London doesn't feel parochial anymore.
No.
I got stopped on Fifth Avenue during the New York shows wearing a preen dress by a woman who knew it was preen, an American woman. And to me that's extraordinary.
But it's the same with, I love talking to all the American press about someone like This Is Menswear, but about someone like Craig, and they all think he's amazing, they all know about him. And you know, like 10 years ago, if you'd have been like, oh, do you know this like grad? He just finished at St. Martin's like, you know, 2 years ago or a year ago, they'd be like, who? But like people know about him, and that's really interesting.
But they may well now, because of the like globality and all that.
Social media.
How easy it is to see, you know, you sit and look on Vogue Runway or whatever, or on Show Studio and see everything. So I guess you wouldn't know if you're in the know, Green now and Craig Green now.
There's someone I want to talk about who I think have harnessed that kind of, you know, the power of the internet really successfully to turn themselves into a brand is Marcus Almeida, and obviously it's relevant season for them because of the LVMH prize win. But I think they've been really, really clever at using aspects of fashion that we tend to criticise, you know, be it street style or kind of, you know, Instagram, what have you, but in a way that feels really authentic and quite joyful. You know, they love their kind of like getting people to send pictures of what they're wearing and what have you, and they've become a kind of real, I think they've got such a clear handwriting, and it's so different to the handwriting of a Mary or a Christopher or something, but like, I always say this about them, but you can imagine what their shop would look like. I can imagine what their perfume would smell like. You know, they're so, I think it's because it's wrapped.
They understand their brand.
Oh,
and then so many people think that brand is a horrible pejorative word, but if you don't have a brand, you're probably not going to sell much.
I
guess it depends what your ultimate goal is.
You know,
Gareth Pugh doesn't want to be a brand. I suspect Marcus Almeida very much do.
But what's nice is brand implies sort of big money and a little dull, but this is just not. I think it's so beautiful. The designers said that they test it on, I think, one of their little sisters. And if she wouldn't wear it, then they'd bin it. Like, you know,
she was in their resort campaign, just like her, like chilling in Brazil. It was really cool.
It's very insouciant, isn't it?
It is very. It's
interesting. It's so daywear focused as well. I think that's what they've done.
I love the denim.
The denim is fantastic.
Well, they started that whole.
And it's been it's so across the high street.
Oh my god, completely. But it's interesting to see them, like, you know, it's really boring to be like, what is luxury? But like, they're really like questioning that, because I think they make things that are, you know, they're not evening wear, they're not precious fabrications necessarily, although they do work with some beautiful fabrications, but a lot of it is quite raw. And it's very much like wear it every day. And I think they've made that luxury to them. Something is luxurious if you get out of your closet every day and you wear it every day and you love it because, you know, it fits with your life every day and it makes you feel great every time you wear it. That's much more luxurious than having something really expensive in a kind of garment bag in your wardrobe.
You could turn up, you know, you could wear it on the red carpet if you really wanted to make a statement and say, you know, I'm not going to follow. And that's what I love about it, because the shape is fantastic, the textures are good, the cut's wonderful. And, you know, again there, you know, it really works with the idea of the female form.
I feel like when they first started showing with Fashion East, they were almost ahead of their time, because we were still, women going to the shows, we were all still wearing dresses and heels. You know, everyone at the shows now is wearing Adidas and jeans, and it's like we've caught up with their vision, and suddenly they are absolutely doing the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, completely, definitely.
It's really interesting about the wearing something, being able to wear something sort of down to the shop, but also on the red carpet. That I was seeing that option happen quite a lot this season. That sort of day wear to night wear thing, and it's such a ridiculous idea that you would. I mean, I guess it's sort of event appropriate, but that you would have a difference. But like Caitlin Price said that she was thinking, when she was designing her collection, she was thinking of her girlfriends from South London, like how they used to go and in trackies get drunk on a park and then be like, we can't go out like this, and have to go in the shade. So she was like, I wanted to create something that you could just do that all day. And that's really an exciting idea. You know, because in the day you feel great and in the evening you feel great. I don't know.
I think it's just really clever. It's also, I think it's about thinking what people actually buy, and whilst I agree there's always going to be a woman that buys, you know, beautiful, very expensive, very kind of embellished, what have you, dresses. I think, you know, something that actually Natalie Massenet said when she was giving the sort of closing London Fashion Week speech, where she talks about how, you know, it's now often women buying designer clothes. For a long time it was men buying them for women, but now it's women themselves. And I think you also just have to think practically, like, what do people want to buy and what can people feasibly wear in their lives? And I think that's what's really smart about what some of these brands are doing. It's like they're speaking to people, and maybe slightly too early, some of them, but they'll get the next generation of luxury consumers that come up. Whereas I think something like, I didn't love Erdem's collection this season because I couldn't see the relevance of it to a younger shopper or someone coming in, and I think, you know, you can fetishize hooking a younger shopper, and I think there's too much of that sometimes. But I think to make a brand sustainable, you have to think about how the next generation dress and consume, and they want, as you say, they want stuff they can wear all day and wear out. They want stuff that they can like run around in, and I think that's why London's interesting, is that you've got people like this who just completely get that.
I remember sitting here a couple of seasons ago and doing the Gucci show when Frida was still there, and I think our general consensus was, these are clothes that men buy for women, a very certain type of woman. And a woman is never going to spend her money on these clothes because they're designed for a very particular kind of woman, possibly more Eastern European, potentially. And now Gucci has changed so much. And I think everything has changed. And we have to remember that the female consumer has more money than she's ever had before. And there are so many dual income couples nowadays. You know, the combined incomes of a man and a woman in their late 20s, early 30s, in a lot of cases, is far more than their parents could ever have earned. Women have got so much spending power. We don't want the Frida Giannini side of Gucci, we want the Michele one, because we want to buy clothes that empower us. We can choose to be sexy, we can choose to be laid back, or we can wear Marcus Almeida and be both of those things.
Exactly, I think that's the thing, is completely rehashing what is sexy and what is sexual and what is sensual and all of that. And I think that's what's really interesting with someone like Caitlin Price at Fashionista. I think her clothes are very much about flirtation, and they're about kind of being a woman and appealing in some way to a man. Do you mind if we just look at Fashionista? Thanks, love. But they're kind of removed from that kind of, I don't know, that awkward sense of being like kind of like,
well, a man's idea of what a woman should be.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is that's the thing about the female.
But all they play with that and they reclaim it, which is interesting. Like Ryan Lowe does that in a really interesting way. It's very much about a woman appealing to a man, because all his shows are this like thing of this woman trying to find love, and then she finds love now, which is lovely. But then it's very much about it's kind of taking those tropes and then reclaiming them and making them appeal to a woman. And I think that's really, really interesting. And it's not just kind of, I think it's equally kind of hackneyed sometimes to see clothes that kind of completely remove from this idea of a woman as a kind of sexual or flirtatious being. And I think it's really nice to see designers work just in different ways. I love that with what Ryan Lowe's doing, is how involved it is in the genders and the interactions between them.
Well, in Paris, there was a lot of shows that I saw that were designed, you know, and of course male designers do amazing things, but were designed by men and were one idea of how a woman should be, how a woman should dress, and it was this like, I'll hold the door for you, and this like, you know, the dress stays in and then it comes out, whereas like these designers, and especially the female designers, and actually Richard Malone, I thought, they are designing, like you say, clothes that you can feel amazing in, and I imagine, and well, I mean, I wear women's clothes and feel amazing in, and you know, and you don't have to have the door held for you, and it just is, and it's still sexy, and it's still, I don't know, I think the female designers.
Well, Simone Rocher is.
Oh my god, I love Simone Rocher. But she does that so much, where her stuff is quite saccharine sometimes. It's very girly. It's like, I was laughing with her the other day because she was like, when you actually say it out loud, it's like florals, pink and pearls. She was like, sounds absolutely disgusting.
Well, there was a perverse element. This like, it was kind of these domestic motifs, like these little dresses, and then there was this kind of slight bit of almost perversion, which I really liked.
Well, it's always kind of super fetishy, I think, if you look really closely. But I thought this was her best collection. And she was kind of describing it and saying that it was like really bonkers, because she was like, she'd found out she was pregnant. She was like, I was like going mad, and I made this mad collection. But I was like, it's beautiful.
It was really beautiful. I'm like, looking back, actually, at all the shows, it was every show better than the other. I mean, you know, when sometimes you don't. It's actually great to have this roundup, because now I'm focusing again.
I know, it's like
it's being
like
a
revision.
It was actually not that bad. Sometimes you pack in so many shows in a day and you forget.
You forget,
This is such a sophisticated show.
It's beautiful.
Incredible. I always forget that she has a Mount Street store.
It's really new now.
It's quite easy to forget that she is on that street with the Dior's and the LVMH Kirkwoods and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and her store is so great because it's so. Like, I interviewed her about the store, and she was talking about how she wanted it to really feel like a place that you could go just for the experience. So she has a lot of kind of her inspirations around there, and like there's an amazing window, big installation, and it's quite a happy shopping environment. You know, like a lot of those Mount Street stores, like I don't like going into them. You feel really uncomfortable. And Simone's, you really get the sense you could like potter around.
It's like a jewel box in the nicest possible way.
It really is. But I think her collections, it's like that idea of loving women. You know, they're warm. There's the, like I think it's really, really nice.
Because they have a femininity, but they are strong.
Yeah.
They're strong. That's
But then she's super feminine, but also super strong. So that's what's really nice about it. But it was interesting because this was the same day as JW Anderson, and it's such a different spirit.
Different. Yeah.
But what's interesting, just going back to JW Anderson, is like, if you think about him, you obviously have to be a kind of strong, confident woman to wear those clothes because they are quite directional, and he's quite, in some ways a very kind of niche, high fashion brand. So to buy into it, there's got to be an element where you're quite an intelligent, empowered, engaged woman, which is why it's so strange that the depiction of a woman is so removed from what I imagine the actual woman who buys it is like. Yeah, exactly. It's like you don't buy that to feel like hot and sexy.
Yeah.
But then it's weird that it's not more.
I'm not sure what the emotion is I would have in his clothes. I don't think it's one I just don't feel he empowers women through his clothes at all.
I think you're quite lofty if you're wearing his clothes. You're quite removed.
You're probably lofty because you're 6 foot tall and a size 6.
I was going to say, it makes you feel lofty.
But then
I'm wearing sort of 6-inch stilettos.
But Simone's is great. I think it's nice to see. I just think it's nice to see someone also who has a really fixed handwriting, and she sits really interestingly between a Marcus Almeida, like we were just looking at, and a kind of an Erdem or a Christopher Kane, where it is much more lady, and this has elements of that, but it just feels quite fresh.
Yeah,
which
and
is really
I
nice.
think again the colour is really interesting because there's no colour, but it's very colour, and some of them.
Yeah.
But it's also very colourful,
Really colourful.
and that's really clever.
Is there anyone I've missed? We haven't talked about Peter Pilotto, we haven't talked about Thomas Tate, we haven't really looked at the Christopher Kane collection. We didn't talk about Versus. Versus came to London.
Yeah, but Versus is not London.
No, it was so weird.
It was a one-off, and
It just felt so out of step as well.
Completely out of step. I don't think it does it any favours. Actually,
No,
to come here.
I don't think it did
The audience
either.
was wrong. I think it just felt as though it was just sort of churning out.
It was just so like the depiction of women and men. It was just mad. When you were like, this is very strange. It's Anthony Vaccarelli.
Yeah, because his Paris show was just the same. It was just like
But
kind of
that's-
early noughties, but lacking a bit of taste.
But then that's kind of his shtick, which I really get. But I think the problem is they're always trying to revamp Versus and be like, it's young, it's relevant, it's fresh. And actually those concepts are quite dated. So to try and put it in the city, which is so known for being young and fresh and cool, it's just not going to work. Like, show it in Milan, do it as a kind of its own boat, and I'm sure it does well. But
nothing in London is really about the body in that way, apart from maybe David Comer.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I reviewed Comer's show for the Daily this year, and the thing I kept thinking was, what do you do if you're David Comer and your entire handwriting is about the female form and a defined waist and a short skirt? What do you do if that's your entire thing and it's so out of step with everybody else around you? And he just keeps on trucking, doesn't he? Just does the same.
But you're going to go in ever decreasing circles, really.
Yeah.
Because in a way, what's happened, as we were saying with Gucci and all the others, is it's exploded, and the possibilities and the sense of surprise. I think has been really.
But that's why
really
Christopher Kane is so interesting, because he's also kind of obsessed with the body, and it's very figure hugging.
But it does feel like his ideas.
Yeah, the ideas kind of make it always really work.
I always think his runway is almost like a fashion lab, because every time you think you've seen another section comes out with more ideas and then more ideas.
And he's really good at referencing himself, which I think is really interesting when designers. It's really hard to do that really well. But I love the way sometimes you see little because it's almost like he's staking his claim. He's being like, yeah, I did this before everyone else did it. I invented that. And this show was a bit like that. There were elements of last season alongside stuff that was like a few seasons old.
That's
and
like
then
that lava lamp collection he did.
Yeah, like the jelly bags that everyone was obsessed with. And I thought this was a really nice show. Is there anyone that we should have talked about that we haven't? We haven't talked about Sibling. There's so many. But maybe that's the good thing about London, is that it's so too much. It's nice, too much in the best possible way. Was it a strong season, do we think?
I think,
Yeah.
Stop breaking it.
And I don't mean that in a negative. The hesitation isn't about it, because actually it's the variety that makes it so strong.
You always can't even group it as a season, can you?
Exactly.
Well, in Milan, you know what groups, you know which designers can be together. Paris, New York has got his own life, but I suppose of London is very much an individuality. I mean, look at also the Giles show. I mean, I think it was a brilliant show. I mean, it was proper couture, and again, he could show what he can do.
It feels like Giles the last couple of seasons has been kind of on fire, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I loved last season's of that whole
season too. There was a big
the casting of Giles. I know you shouldn't talk about that. You should talk about the clothes, but oh my god!
I know.
I was like, what is this? It was amazing.
The casting.
The casting.
These shows do feel like an event now,
They
which
do.
it hasn't been for a while.
They have real presence.
Yeah, really, really great.
The prints were great, and you know, you see.
He's definitely.
Yeah. What else was good?
I like Thomas Tate's collection a lot.
Yeah.
I thought it was really good.
Really strong.
He's always good, isn't he?
Yeah, he's really good, really good. It's you always feel sometimes like he's too smart for everything. You're like, oh, like I think he's so good. He's so brilliant.
Always.
But I also thought even the stuff I hated, I kind of liked this season. Or I didn't think anyone really did a dud collection. There were a few that I didn't think were kind of the best that people have done. But even with that, you can't help but kind of feel quite excited about London, just because everything is changing so much and there's so much kind of, and everyone's growing. It feels like there's always a new store opening. There's always a new this,
and it felt super international as well.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Peter Pilotto's show. There were so many clients in there, and so many people wearing Pilotto.
Yeah.
Every time I looked up from playing on my phone, there was another woman walking past me in a Pilotto coat.
Yeah.
And that's quite extraordinary to see so many people buying in that way.
But it's also because so many of the designers themselves, they're not British, like they're London trained, but they're not like English designers. So it is authentically a really, really global city, and you don't really get that elsewhere so much.
But that is you know what Britain is, isn't it? Like what Britain is about, that master, and especially London diversity.
But that's what fashion needs to be.
And I liked it being in Soho. I was very like, what on earth are they thinking? The traffic, their nightmares. But I liked it. And I was talking to Piers Atkinson at the Sibling show about this, and he was saying everyone's saying how much the designers like being in the exhibition because you're all in one place. If you're going to go and see, I don't know, Stephen Jones' hat, on the way you'll bump into a young I don't know, jewellery designer, whereas when you were in the naval showrooms in all different places in Somerset House, you missed half the exhibition. It was also very alienating because you'd stick your head round a door and someone would stare back at you and you'd people off again. Whereas here it was all on one level. And I thought it was a great way to mix up the old and new in terms of the buying. Because we mustn't forget, at the end of the day, the buying is so important.
Yeah, very true. Good note to end on, buying very important. Let's hope everyone spends lots of money on London designers, and then we can buy it all. Yay! Should we give them a round of applause to wrap things up?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, London.